Não narrar. Trilha. Melancólica, nostálgica, com toque de tensão sutil. It was a Saturday, grey and cool, the kind of day that felt heavy even before anything truly bad happened. My front yard was a patchwork of old blankets and card tables, piled high with a lifetime of memories. A yard sale, they called it. I called it a forced eviction of my own history, orchestrated by my son, Robert, and his wife, Clara. Now narrar. Cena. Close-up nas mãos envelhecidas de Martha, segurando uma pequena estatueta de porcelana. Em segundo plano, a movimentação de quintal de vendas. Clara had a knack for making everything I owned feel like a burden. Every antique, every photograph, every piece of furniture with a story felt, to her, like a weight holding her back. And today, her words cut deeper than usual. Now narrar. SFX, voz de Clara, off-screen, soando tanto irritada y condescendente. Honestly, Martha, she'd said, her voice sharp enough to draw blood, but always with that sickly sweet tone she reserved for public performance. What are we even doing with this old junk? Nobody wants this stuff anymore. It's just taking up space. Now, narrar. Trilha. Atenção aumenta pouco. She was holding my beautiful old Zenith radio. Not just any radio, but the radio. The one my late husband Arthur had meticulously restored, tuning its amber glow to jazz stations late into the night. It sat on a small card table, gleaming despite its age, a silent sentinel of a time when life felt simpler, richer. Now narrar. Cena. Close up. No radio vintage. Depois panning para o rosto de Martha, com uma expressão de dor contida. My heart clenched. It wasn't just metal and wood. It was Arthur's hands, his patience, his passion. It was the sound of our youth, humming in the background of 1,000 forgotten dinners, 1,000 quiet evenings. Clara didn't see that. She saw dust and obsolescence. Now narrar. SFX. Clara. Off-screen. Risada forçada. Misturada com sarcasmo. Look at it, she continued, turning it over with a dismissive finger. It's huge. A monstrosity. It probably doesn't even work. Who would pay a dime for this? She scoffed, louder than necessary, drawing the attention of a few neighbors browsing my sad collection. Mrs. Henderson from next door, a kind woman, gave me a look of sympathy that only made the shame burn hotter. Não narrar. Cena. Clara gesticulando para o rádio com desdém. Martha de pé a poucos metros, olhos fixos no rádio. Robert, my son, stood by the grill, flipping cheap hot dogs he insisted on serving. He didn't say a word. He rarely did any more, not when Clara was on one of her tirades. He just looked away, focusing intently on the charcoal smoke, as if his mother's humiliation was merely a slight inconvenience. It had been years since he truly stood up for me, years since I felt like his mother, and not just another item on Clara's to-do list. Now narrar. Trilha. Torna-se. Mais sombria. Sentimento de abandono e resignação. The whole yard sale was her idea. It's time to declutter, Martha, she'd chirped a month ago. You're getting older. You don't need all this stuff. What she meant was, we need you to clear out so we can sell the house and you can move into that assisted living place we picked out. The one with the sterile hallways and the smell of industrial cleaner. The one where I'd be just another resident, stripped of my belongings, my autonomy. Não narrar. Cena. Martha lembra de momento com Arthur, sutilmente, talvez breve flash ou olhar para longe. I tried to protest, of course. But these things have sentimental value, I'd pleaded. This house is my home. Arthur and I built it. Robert had just sighed. Mom, it's for your own good. It's too much for you to manage. Clara had merely smiled, a predatory gleam in her eyes. She always got her way. always. Não narrar. Lais SFX. Barulho de crianças brincando na rua. Contrasta com o silêncio tenso ao redor de Martha. Now, standing there, watching her belittle the last tangible piece of my husband, something inside me snapped. Not with a shout or a dramatic confrontation. No, it was a quiet, almost imperceptible click. The kind of click that happens when a carefully constructed dam finally gives way. Not with a roar, but with a trickle that promises a deluge. Now, narrar. Cena. Close-up no olhar de Martha. Determinação começa a aparecer. It's just junk, Clara repeated, loud enough for me to hear, placing a ridiculous price tag of $5 on the Zenith. $5 for a lifetime. $5 for a piece of history. $5 for Arthur's legacy. Não narrar. Trilha. Muda para algo mais resoluto, quase pulso rítmico. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest, a fire that had long been dormant. They wanted me to be small, to be a burden, to be a faded photograph of my former self. They wanted to erase my past, to make way for their future, a future where I was neatly tucked away, out of sight, out of mind. But Arthur's radio, that was where they had gone too far. Não narrar. Cena. Martha se move lentamente em direção à mesa onde o rádio está. My eyes fell on the brass plaque on the back of the radio, carefully placed by Arthur all those years ago. It bore a serial number, a tiny, almost invisible mark that Clara would never notice. But I noticed it, and I remembered. Não narrar. Thriller. Toque de mistério. Uma revelação iminente. I walked slowly towards the table, my steps measured, my face, I hoped, unreadable. Clara was busy haggling over a chipped ceramic vase with an elderly couple. Robert was still oblivious, preoccupied with his hot dogs. This was my chance. Não narrar. SFs. Passos leves de Martha na grama. Without a word, without a glance at Clara, I reached down. My fingers, gnarled with age, carefully lifted the radio from the table. It was heavier than it looked, but I held it close, like a precious child. Não narrar. Cena. Martha pega o rádio. Clara, de costas, não percebe. Martha! Clara's voice, suddenly sharp, cut through the air. She had turned, her eyes narrowing, as she saw me carrying the radio. What are you doing with that? I just put a price tag on it. We need to sell that. Não narrar. Thriller. Música para em uma nota tensa. I didn't stop. I simply walked past her, my gaze fixed on the back door of my house, the home they so desperately wanted to take from me. I heard her protest, then her irritated sigh. Robert finally looked up, confusion on his face, but he didn't intervene. He never did. Não narrar. Cena. Martha entra na casa, fechando a porta suavemente, deixando Clara e Robert do lado de fora. Inside, the silence of my living room was a bomb. I gently placed the radio on the sturdy oak chest that had always been its home. I ran my fingers over its smooth wooden casing, feeling the faint vibrations of its hidden history. Junk, she had called it. That afternoon, I decided, was the day that piece of junk would change everything. The question was, how? And what would it cost them? Não narrar. Trilha. Crescendo sutil de determinação e vingança silenciosa, terminando com som de clique ou shime discreto. Não narrar. Trilha. Melancólica, introspectiva, mas com toque de crescente determinação. The words still echoed in my ears, bouncing off the old brick walls of the yard. Junk! Janet had called my beautiful, irreplaceable Zenith radio. Junk! Her voice, sharp as a broken shard of glass, cut right through the humid summer air, and through my heart. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as she casually gestured towards the table where my life's most precious remnants lay, waiting to be haggled over. A small crowd had gathered, a few curious faces turning to me, witnessing the public dismissal of my memories. My son, Mark, stood beside her, silent, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement, as if suddenly fascinated by its imperfections. He said nothing, absolutely nothing. That silence was a deeper wound than Janet's careless words. It confirmed everything. I was no longer a mother, a woman with a history, a person with value. I was just an inconvenience, a burden, a ghost haunting the corners of their perfect modern life. I remember clutching the wooden frame of the radio, the smooth, cool veneer, a stark contrast to the burning shame in my cheeks. This radio wasn't just an object, it was a bridge to another time, a whisper from a man I had loved with every fiber of my being. My late husband, Thomas, had found it in a dusty antique shop in upstate New York just after we were married. He'd spent weeks restoring it, polishing the wood, fixing the wiring, coaxing music back into its soul. It was the first gift he ever truly crafted for me, a symbol of our nascent life together, filled with the promise of quiet evenings and shared dreams. Não narrar. Cena. Flashback rápido da jovem narradora e Thomas, sorrindo, ele mostrando o rádio restaurado. Every crackle, every warm glow of the dial, every song that ever drifted from its speaker held a piece of us, and Janet, with a flick of her wrist, had reduced it to mere clutter, an unsightly relic fit only for the trash heap. Later that evening, after the yard sale packed up and the last lingering neighbor had departed, the house fell silent again, an oppressive, heavy silence. I sat in my small room, the one they called the guest room, which felt more like an attic storage unit than a living space. The radio sat on my nightstand, the only piece of my past I had managed to salvage from Janet's aggressive decluttering crusade. Its presence was a tiny defiance in a world where I felt utterly powerless. My current situation was a cage I had unwittingly built for myself. After Thomas passed, the loneliness had become a physical ache. Mark, my only son, had been so quick to offer, "Mom, come live with us. We have plenty of room. You shouldn't be alone." His words had been a lifeline then, a warm promise in the cold grip of grief. I'd sold my small familiar house, pouring most of the money into a trust for my future, keeping a portion for immediate needs. I thought I was making the smart choice, simplifying, moving closer to family. But plenty of room quickly became the spare bedroom, crammed with their old furniture, a repository for forgotten things, and not being alone meant endless subtle demands. My pension, which I thought was secure, was often borrowed for unexpected bills, car repairs, school trips for the grandchildren, a new appliance, always with the promise of repayment, a promise that rarely materialized. Não narrar, asphyx, panelas batendo na cozinha em segundo plano, voz da Adele chamando secamente. "Mom, can you come help with dinner?" Janet's voice from the kitchen, not a question, but a command. I sighed, pulling myself up. My legs ached, my back ached, my spirit ached. But I went. Every evening was a dance of unspoken expectations. I cooked, I cleaned, I looked after the children after school, all under the guise of helping out. Yet my presence was always tolerated, never truly welcomed. My opinions were dismissed, my stories cut short. Just last week during Sunday lunch, I tried to share a memory about Thomas, about how he used to tell the most wonderful stories about growing up on the farm. Janet immediately interrupted, turning to Mark with a bright, performative smile. "Oh, honey, did you remember to call the plumber about the leaky faucet? It's been driving me absolutely insane." The conversation shifted, my voice lost, my memory unheard. Mark just nodded, oblivious to the small death of my story. It wasn't just the radio or the ignored stories. It was the constant, creeping diminishment of who I was. My favorite teacup, chipped and then discarded. My collection of pressed flowers, accidentally thrown out during a garage clean-out. Each loss, small on its own, was a chisel taking away a piece of my identity. The night after the yard sale, I couldn't sleep. The word junk kept circling, like a vulture in my mind. But beneath the humiliation, something else began to stir. A faint spark, a quiet fury. I had given up so much for them. My home, my independence, my very self. And for what? To be treated like an aging prop in their perfect suburban drama? I looked at the Zenith radio, its bakelite glowing faintly in the moonlight, filtering through the curtains. Thomas's radio, our radio. It felt like a silent challenge. He wouldn't have stood for this. He would have fought. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. Years ago, a neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a kind old man who dabbed in antiques, had once commented on the radio during one of our summer barbecues. "That's a fine piece, Agnes," he'd said, running a knowing hand over its glossy top. "A Zenith Stratosphere, model 1000Z. Very rare, very sought after by collectors. You hang on to that?" At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. It was precious to me because it was Thomas's, not because of some market value. Now narrar. Cena. Close-up no rádio. A mão envelhecida da narradora tocando-o gentilmente. Now, Mr. Henderson's words echoed with new meaning. Very rare, very sought after. The next morning, while Janet was at her spin class and Mark was at work, I made a decision. A quiet, firm decision. I wasn't going to just fade away. I wasn't going to let them strip me of everything I held dear. The radio was a symbol, yes, but perhaps it could also be a key to unlocking the door to my own life again. I pulled out my old flip phone, a relic Janet often mocked. My hands trembled slightly as I navigated the familiar worn buttons. I found Mr. Henderson's number, long saved but never used. I took a deep breath. "Hello, Mr. Henderson? It's Agnes. Agnes Miller. I hope I'm not disturbing you." The conversation was short, cautious on my part. I explained about the radio, carefully omitting Janet's hurtful words, simply saying I was curious about its value now. Mr. Henderson, bless his kind heart, remembered it immediately. He sounded genuinely excited. "Agnes, dear, that's a truly special piece. I might know just the person. A good friend of mine, Samuel. He runs a reputable antique dealership in the city, specializes in vintage electronics. He's very discreet. Let me give him a call, and I'll get back to you with his contact information. Don't do anything with it until then, you hear?" A sliver of hope, cool and clear, cut through the fog of my despair. Discretion. That was important. This had to be my secret, my quiet rebellion. Now narrar. SFX. Telefone desligando. Som de respiração aliviada. Later that day, Janet came home, bustling into the kitchen, a pile of shopping bags clutched in her hands. She barely glanced at me as I helped put away groceries. "Mom, can you keep an eye on the kids tonight? Mark and I are going out for dinner. And oh, by the way, I was thinking about reorganizing your room this weekend. It's looking a bit cluttered. We really need to make more space in the house." Her voice was light, casual, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of control. "Perhaps we can finally clear out some of that old stuff." My heart hammered in my chest. Old stuff. Was she talking about the radio, my few remaining books? My resolve hardened. She would not touch it. Not anymore. I simply nodded, a placid mask hiding the storm brewing within. But this time the nod wasn't submission. It was camouflage. I waited for Mr. Henderson's call. a tiny seed of defiance taking root in my soul. I was starting to understand that true value wasn't always what met the eye, or what was declared junk by those who saw only surface. Sometimes it was hidden, waiting to be revealed, and sometimes its revelation could change everything. Não narrar, trilha, aumenta ligeiramente, com um tom de antecipação e mistério. The phone finally rang later that evening, a quiet buzz that only I heard. It was Mr. Henderson. He had Samuel's contact. He's expecting your call, Agnes. He's very interested. My hand trembled as I wrote down the number, a secret note tucked into my worn Bible. This was it, the first step. The first step towards reclaiming not just a radio, but myself. But what would Samuel say? How much was it really worth? And how could I possibly do this without Janet finding out? The questions swirled, a nervous excitement mixed with dread. The game had begun, though only I knew I was playing, and the stakes, I was beginning to realize, were far higher than just an old radio. The words, worthless junk, echoed louder than any bell. They clung to me, a sticky, bitter residue, long after the last yard sale shopper had driven away. I sat alone in the quiet of my small living room, the old radio on the mantelpiece seeming to hum with a secret life, a quiet defiance of Martha's cruel pronouncement. My hands, gnarled with age, traced the smooth polished wood. It wasn't just a radio, it was a memory, a link to my father, to simpler times, to a world Martha knew nothing about, nor cared to. Now narrower, SFX, a soft sigh. That night, sleep was a fleeting, restless thing. Every time my eyes closed, I saw Martha's sneering face, heard her dismissive laugh, and then a new thought began to surface, a persistent whisper in the dark. What if? What if there was more to this radio than even I understood? My father had always been meticulous about his possessions, especially those he cherished. He'd often spoken of its unique character, its story. I'd dismissed it as sentimental talk, a father's fondness, but Martha's venom had somehow sharpened my perception. It felt like a challenge, a gauntlet thrown down, not by Martha, but by fate itself. Now narrower, Sina, close up on the elder's hands, then a slow pan to the radio. The next morning, a quiet resolve settled over me, a feeling I hadn't known in years. It was the kind of stubbornness that only comes with age, born from enduring countless slights. I pulled out the old phone book, a relic almost as old as the radio itself, and began to pore over the yellowed pages. Antiques, appraisals, collectibles. My finger, trembling slightly, traced the names. I needed to be discreet. Martha, with her uncanny ability to sense weakness, would mock any effort I made. This had to be my secret, my quiet rebellion. Now narrower, Triller, music becomes slightly more hopeful, still subtle. I found a listing for an antique shop, timeless treasures, several towns over, far enough that I wouldn't run into anyone I knew, or worse, anyone Martha knew. The thought of moving the radio filled me with apprehension. It was heavy, and my back wasn't what it used to be. But the idea of letting Martha's words dictate my reality was heavier still. Now narrower, SFX, car engine starting quietly. A few days later, under the pretense of running errands, I carefully wrapped the radio in an old quilt and, with considerable effort, loaded it into the trunk of my car. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and exhilaration. It felt like I was embarking on a grand adventure, a journey I never expected to take at my age. The drive was long, the landscape blurring outside my window. With every mile, the knot of humiliation in my stomach began to loosen, replaced by a cautious optimism. Now narrower, Sina, elder driving, then pulling up to an quaint antique shop. Timeless Treasures was a charming little place, overflowing with dusty curiosities and forgotten histories. The air smelled of old wood and beeswax. A kind-faced man with spectacles perched on his nose, Mr. Harrison, greeted me. He had a gentle, knowing smile that put me instantly at ease. I carefully unwrapped the radio, placing it on his worn wooden counter. Now Narar, ISFX, gentle clink as the radio's placed on the counter. It was my father's, I explained, my voice a little unsteady. He always treasured it. My daughter-in-law, she called it junk. The last word came out a whisper, still carrying a sting. Mr. Harrison nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He didn't speak, but his gaze was understanding. He began to examine the radio with a reverence that surprised me. He ran his fingers over the dial, peered into the speaker cloth, even turned it over to inspect the back panel. He seemed to be listening to its story, not just looking at its parts. Now Narar. Trailer. Music becomes more inquisitive, a sense of discovery. Minutes stretched into what felt like an hour. My breath hitched in my throat as he took out a magnifying glass, examining a small, almost invisible mark near the tuning knob. Remarkable, he murmured, more to himself than to me. Truly remarkable. My heart began to pound again, this time with a different kind of anticipation. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a quiet excitement. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and serious, "do you have any idea what you have here?" Now, Narar. Sena. Close up on Mr. Harrison's face, then the elder's face, a mix of apprehension and hope. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. He smiled. "This isn't just any vintage radio. This is a Philco Mystery Control model, 42322, and it's in extraordinary condition for its age. Do you know its significance?" I could only stare, my mind racing. He continued, "These were revolutionary. They were among the first radios that could be controlled remotely, without any wires. A true marvel of its time. But more than that," he paused, leaning in slightly. "This particular model, in this pristine condition, with its original remote unit, is incredibly rare. Very few have survived intact." Now Narar. SFX. Soft, amazed gasp from the elder. He then proceeded to tell me about its history, its scarcity, the passionate collectors who sought them out. He spoke of auction houses, specialized dealers, and the astounding prices these pieces commanded. My head spun. But how much?" I finally managed to croak. Mr. Harrison took a deep breath. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to an almost reverent tone, "a piece like this, in this condition, could easily fetch well into the six figures, perhaps even more, with the right buyer and the right auction." Now Narar. Trailer. A dramatic ascending musical flourish, then settles into a quiet, stunned theme. Six figures. The words hung in the air, echoing in the quiet shop, reverberating through my very being. Enough to buy her house. The thought flashed through my mind, sharp and sudden, like a bolt of lightning. Martha's house. The one she'd always boasted about. The one she'd said I'd never afford to even visit on my own terms. The sheer audacious irony of it almost made me laugh aloud. Now Narar. Sena. Elder's face, eyes wide with disbelief and a nascent spark of an idea. Mr. Harrison, seeing my stunned expression, kindly offered to connect me with a reputable auction house, or even to purchase it himself at a fair price, though he admitted I'd get more through an auction. I thanked him, my voice still shaky, and told him I needed time to think. He wrapped the radio back up with even more care than I had, handing it back to me with a respectful nod. As I drove away, the radio felt different in the trunk. It was no longer just a memory. It was a promise, a tangible piece of power I never knew I possessed. Now Narar. SFX, car driving away, quiet hum. My mind whirred, piecing together fragments of conversations, past slights, Martha's endless demands. She wanted this house, my house, the one my father built, the one I'd lived in my entire life. She'd made it clear, subtly at first, then more overtly, that she expected it to be hers, eventually. She'd even started to drop hints about modernizing it, changing things that were dear to me. This radio, this magnificent, worthless junk radio, was my unexpected shield, my silent weapon. Now, Narar, Triller, music becomes subtly suspenseful, a feeling of quiet plotting. I pulled into my driveway, the sun setting, casting long shadows. My house looked smaller, yet somehow more significant than before. I carefully carried the radio back inside, placing it back on the mantelpiece. It sat there, unassuming, a quiet sentinel, guarding a life-altering secret. I looked at it, then out the window, towards Martha's perfectly manicured lawn, visible just beyond my own overgrown rose bushes. She thought she had me cornered. She thought I was a senile old woman with nothing but junk. She had no idea at all. The game was about to change, and I, for the first time in a very long time, felt like I held all the cards. But how to play them? That was the new question, the delicious, terrifying puzzle that lay before me. Now Narar, Triller. Music fades out slowly, leaving a feeling of unresolved tension and quiet determination. Não narrar. Trilha. Uma melodia de suspense suave e contínua, com notas de piano isoladas e cordas de tensão. Amanhã no escritório do Sr. Davis parecia carregar o peso do meu destino. Aquele especialista em eletrônicos vintage, com seus óculos na ponta do nariz, observava o rádio com uma reverência quase religiosa. Cada movimento de suas mãos enluvadas era preciso, cada olhar estudado. Ele testava os botões, verificava a estrutura da madeira envelhecida, passava uma pequena lupa sobre os detalhes da grade. Eu sentia meu coração batendo forte, um tambor abafado no meu peito. Era como esperar um veredito. Dona Eleanor, ele começou, a voz baixa, quase um sussurro. Este não é apenas um rádio raro, é uma peça excepcional. A condição, o modelo, a história da marca, tudo se alinha de uma forma que raramente se vê. Não narrar. SFX, um clique suave, como um interruptor antigo sendo ligado. Ele se virou para mim, os olhos brilhando. Pelas minhas estimativas iniciais, e eu precisaria de uma avaliação mais formal e um laudo de um historiador para cravar o valor exato. Mas estamos falando de, no mínimo, algo em torno de $150 mil. $150 mil! O ar pareceu rarear no ambiente. Eu pisquei. Uma quantia tão astronômica, tão irreal, que minha mente demorou a processar. $150 mil por aquela tralha, aquele lixo que Clara queria jogar fora. O número ecoava em minha cabeça, cada sílaba uma pequena vingança. O Sr. Davis continuou a explicar sobre colecionadores, sobre a exclusividade da peça, mas suas palavras se misturavam em um zumbido distante. Minha mente já voava, pintando cenários de um futuro que, até então, parecia impossível. E se eu quiser vender? Perguntei, minha voz um pouco mais firme do que eu esperava. Ele me apresentou opções, leilões especializados, contatos com colecionadores particulares, vendas discretas. Eu queria a discrição, não queria alarde, não queria que Clara ou Mark soubessem de nada até o momento certo. Eu assinei os papéis para uma avaliação completa e um plano de venda confidencial. Saí do escritório com um frio na barriga, a sensação de carregar um segredo que poderia mudar tudo. O rádio não era mais uma relíquia familiar. Era uma arma, carregada e pronta para o disparo. Não narrar. Cena. Imagens de Eleanor em casa, pensativa, depois em frente ao computador, olhando imóveis. Os dias seguintes foram uma mistura de ansiedade e euforia silenciosa. Eu recebi o laudo final. $175.000. O valor me deixou tonta. Eu dei o sinal verde para a venda. O Sr. Davis garantiu um comprador particular, um colecionador excêntrico que fazia questão de total anonimato. A transação foi rápida, profissional e, acima de tudo, discreta. O rádio foi recolhido por um serviço de transporte especializado e, uma semana depois, o dinheiro estava na minha conta bancária. Sento-me na frente do meu computador, olhando para o extrato bancário. Aquele número, aquele enorme número, era real, era meu. As lágrimas brotaram, quentes e inesperadas. Não eram lágrimas de tristeza, nem de derrota. Eram de alívio, de uma vitória tão doce que quase doía. Eu não era mais a velhinha fácil de enganar. Eu era a mulher que tinha sido subestimada, humilhada, e agora estava de posse de uma fortuna que ninguém esperava. Clara me ligou no dia seguinte, como de costume, para saber se eu tinha conseguido vender alguma coisa de valor no tal bazar de tralhas. Ela riu pelo telefone, um som oco e condescendente. Sabe, mãe, é melhor você se desfazer logo dessa casa grande. É muito trabalho para você. Tem uma casinha ótima aqui no bairro do Mark, a gente podia ver para você. Vendi algumas coisas sim, Clara, eu disse, mantendo minha voz neutra. E o rádio também foi embora, para um colecionador. Veja só, tinha um valor que nem eu imaginava. Não narrar. Trilha. A tensão aumenta sutilmente. Pude sentir o breve silêncio do outro lado da linha. Clara parecia processar a informação, provavelmente pensando que eu havia vendido por alguns trocados. Ah, é? Que bom, né? Pelo menos se livrou daquela coisa velha. Ela descartou o assunto com a facilidade de quem joga lixo no cesto. Mas, de qualquer forma, a casa é o próximo passo. Mark e eu estamos olhando umas propriedades. Quem sabe uma que sirva para nós também? Quem sabe a gente não se muda para um lugar maior e você fica com a nossa? Ela riu de novo, uma risada que sempre me irritava. Ela sempre conseguia misturar uma falsa preocupação com um interesse egoísta. Eu me limitei a dizer: "Vou pensar, Clara. Tenho meus próprios planos." E desliguei. Naquela noite, abri meu notebook e comecei a navegar por sites de imóveis. Passei pelos pequenos apartamentos que Clara e Mark sugeriam para mim. Depois, parei em um anúncio específico. Uma casa de 3 quartos, com um quintal espaçoso e uma cozinha recém-reformada. Uma casa que eles sempre comentavam, um sonho para eles. Uma casa que estava no mercado há alguns meses e que agora eu podia comprar à vista. O coração batia forte. Olhei para a foto do imóvel, imaginando Clara e Mark rindo da minha tralha no quintal. Imaginando a expressão deles quando descobrissem. Aquela casa. Aquela seria a peça-chave. Não era vingança, eu disse a mim mesma. Era justiça. Era mostrar a eles que a verdadeira riqueza nem sempre está no que se vê, mas no valor que se atribui e na dignidade que se recupera. Não narrar? SFX. Um clique do mouse. Meus dedos pairaram sobre o botão Agendar visita. A decisão estava tomada. O próximo passo seria o mais difícil e o mais gratificante. Eles estavam prestes a descobrir que o lixo de uma mulher velha podia valer muito mais do que a casa dos seus sonhos. E eu mal podia esperar para ver a reação. Não narrar. Trilha. A música fica mais intensa, mas ainda contida, deixando uma sensação de antecipação e poder silencioso. Não narrar. Trilha. Suspenseful, then triumphant, then peaceful. The words junk and worthless echoed in my mind, a toxic refrain. The yard sale was winding down, most of my memories now scattered across dusty tables, sold for a pittance. But the radio, it sat there, a silent sentinel, a relic of a life my daughter-in-law Clara couldn't begin to comprehend. Her sneer still stung, a fresh wound. My son, Mark, had just stood by, as usual. That was the deepest cut. I closed my eyes, picturing the expert, his meticulous touch, the faint hum of power. His final words had been a whisper, almost reverent. "It's a rare piece, Mrs. Gable, a very rare piece indeed. The market for these, it's astonishing." He had mentioned a private collector, someone discreet, someone who understood true value. Now Narar, SFX, gentle wind chimes, distant traffic. I drove away from that yard sale, with the radio carefully buckled into my passenger seat, the empty, hollow feeling in my chest slowly being replaced by a strange, unfamiliar resolve. The humiliation was a burning coal, but beneath it, a tiny ember of rebellion had begun to glow. I remembered the appraiser's contact details, tucked into my purse, a business card almost too elegant for my worn wallet. I didn't go home. I drove directly to the address he had given me, a quiet, unassuming gallery on the edge of town. My hands trembled as I parked. This wasn't just about selling an old radio anymore. This was about reclaiming a piece of myself that had been chipped away, piece by painful piece, by Clara's relentless disdain and Mark's agonizing indifference. Now Narar, Sina, elder in a quiet gallery, the radio on a velvet cloth. Inside, the gallery owner, Mr. Elias, a man with kind eyes and an encyclopedic knowledge of antiques, greeted me with a solemn nod. He already knew about my visit, the appraiser having called ahead. He treated the radio with a reverence Clara would never understand. He didn't just look at it, he listened to it, to its silent history. He offered me tea. I sat in a plush armchair, watching him, my heart thrumming a nervous rhythm. He explained the nuances, the historical significance, the incredible craftsmanship that made this particular model unique. It wasn't just a radio, it was a time capsule. "Mrs. Gable," he said, finally looking up, his gaze steady. "This piece, it's exceptional. I have a client who has been searching for one like this for years. A true connoisseur. They are willing to pay a premium." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "A very substantial premium." My breath hitched. He named a figure, a number so large, so utterly incomprehensible, that my mind momentarily went blank. It wasn't just enough for repairs. It wasn't just enough for a trip. It was a sum that could redefine a life. My life. Now Narar. SFX. Soft, distant bell toll. I remember nodding, not trusting my voice. My eyes welled up, not with sadness, but with a profound, overwhelming sense of disbelief and a quiet building joy. All those years it had sat there, a silent testament to a life well lived, dismissed as junk by someone incapable of seeing its true worth. And now, its true worth was revealed. Mr. Elias handled all the paperwork with efficiency and discretion. The transaction was swift, a wire transfer to my bank account. I walked out of that gallery with a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. The weight of worry, the slow creeping anxiety about my future, about housing, about being a burden, it had all lifted. Now Narar, Sina, elder, looking at her bank statement on her phone, then a triumphant, quiet smile. That evening, I didn't just go home. I drove past Clara and Mark's new house, the one they were so proud of, the one they had stretched themselves thin to buy. They had been dropping hints for months about how big my old house was, how much upkeep it needed, how I should really consider moving into something more manageable, perhaps even selling it to them at a family discount. The subtext was clear. They wanted my house. They wanted my assets. They saw my future as an extension of their own financial planning. But I had my own plans now, my own future. Now Narar, Thriller, determined, hopeful music begins. The next morning, I made a series of phone calls. Not to Mark, not to Clara. First, to a real estate agent I'd known for years, a woman who understood discretion. Then, to a solicitor. I wanted options. I wanted to explore what a person with newfound financial freedom could truly achieve. My old house held decades of memories, but it also held decades of expectation, unspoken demands from a family that saw me more as an asset than a person. I pictured a smaller place, a bright, modern apartment overlooking the park, where I could choose my own furniture, set my own rules, live my own life. A place with no dust, no endless repairs, and certainly no Clara telling me what belonged in my attic. Now Narar, SFX, typing on a keyboard, soft rustling of papers. My solicitor laid out the possibilities. Mrs. Gable, she said, a warm smile on her face. With these funds, you have absolute freedom. You can secure any property you desire. You can invest. You can live out your retirement years with complete peace of mind. Peace of mind. That was the priceless thing Clara had tried to steal from me. That was the junk she thought my life was. I spent weeks quietly researching, visiting properties, envisioning a life unburdened. I found it. A beautiful, sun-drenched condo, perfectly sized, with a balcony that overlooked a vibrant garden. It was everything I had ever wanted, but never dared to dream of. Now Narar, Sina, elder happily signing papers for a new condo, a significant contrast to the yard sale scene. I signed the papers, the ink feeling heavy and significant against the crisp white page. This was mine, all mine. No one had bought it for me. No one had dictated the terms. I had bought it with the junk Clara had so carelessly dismissed. The news, as it always does, slowly filtered through the family grapevine. I hadn't called them directly. I never had to. Mark called me, his voice tight with a strange mix of confusion and indignation. "Mom, we heard you bought a new place. A condo? Why didn't you tell us? We were going to help you find something." Now Nara, Hind SFX, a gentle, knowing sigh. I smiled, a real smile. "Oh, Mark," I said, my voice calm, almost serene. "I didn't need any help. I found something perfect, and I paid for it myself. Cash." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, trying to reconcile this independent, financially secure woman with the fragile mother he and Clara had so expertly managed. Then I heard Clara's voice, sharp and incredulous in the background. "Cash? What cash? She doesn't have that kind of money." Now Narar. Sina. Elder sits on her new balcony, a cup of tea, looking peaceful. I took a deep breath, looking out at the sun-drenched garden. "Oh, I do, dear," I murmured, loud enough for Clara to hear. "I sold my old radio, the one you called junk at the yard sale. Turns out it was worth rather a lot, enough to buy this beautiful new home and ensure I live out my days exactly as I please." The ensuing silence was deafening. It was a silence filled with the sudden, shattering realization of their colossal misjudgment. Clara's plans for my house, her gentle nudges towards downsizing that would benefit her, her casual dismissal of my possessions, all of it had just evaporated. My independence had not just surprised them, it had rendered their schemes utterly irrelevant. Now Nara. Trilla. Triumphant and serene music swells. I hung up the phone. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic confrontations, just a quiet, unshakable sense of peace. I had reclaimed my dignity, not with anger, but with action. My vintage radio, the junk that Clara had mocked, had bought me more than a new house. It had bought me freedom. It had bought me respect. It had bought me a future that was entirely my own. And in doing so, it had profoundly impacted Clara's carefully laid plans, making her realize just how much she had underestimated the quiet woman she thought she could control. Now, Nara, SFX, birds chirping softly. This story, my story, is a testament to the hidden value in things and in people that are often overlooked. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are found where we least expect them, and that true worth is never determined by someone else's dismissive opinion. My life, my choices, my future, they are now truly and completely mine. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed or undervalued, please give this video a like and tell me in the comments below. Have you ever found a hidden gem, either an object or a moment of quiet strength, when you least expected it? I'd love to hear your experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of quiet triumphs and late life justice. There's power in our stories, and there's strength in numbers.